Hi, I'm Samantha,
Hi, I'm Nadia.
and welcome to Concordia Church Online.
Hi, welcome to Concordia's weekly message. Some of you are tuning in for the very first time, so I wanted to take a second to introduce myself. I'm Richard. I'm Concordia's pastor. Thanks for being here today. To update you through the weekly message, a couple things I want to draw your attention to get the most out of it. There's going to be some places we're going to have some pauses. I want to encourage you to not blow through that, but to just hit pause and do some of the work there, have some of the conversations. Another thing that helps you get more out of the message is if you want to go deeper into some of the other things the Bible says is in the video description, there's a Bible study that you can download that'll take you to some other places on the same big ideas today. And there's a listening guide there that you can download as well if that helps you to focus your attention during the time that we're together in this conversation. We've added some singing elements to this so that those of you who feel most comfortable worshiping at home can do that. And you might feel like you're singing alone, but you're singing with the choirs of heaven. They're there worshiping with you in your house at the same time. If your heart is moved to give, and that's a good thing to do, because here's what we at Concordia believe about that. We don't believe that you give to get something from God. We believe that when you give, you move deeper into the heart of God. I want to encourage you, if you've never given before, to take steps into generosity and to start where your heart already is. Maybe that's in your neighborhood, your community, somewhere in the world or the country, some cause that you're really connecting with. Give something to there. If you're connected at a church, I want to encourage you to support that ministry and to give there. If you're connecting with this church, you'll see come across the screen ways that you can connect through our online platforms and give in very secure ways. Again, thanks for being here today. Here comes some of those singing elements right now.
This is my prayer in the desert, when all that's within me feels dry. This is my prayer in my hunger and need. My God is a God who provides. And this is my prayer in the fire, in weakness, or trial, or pain. There is a faith proved of more worth than gold, so refine me, Lord, through the flame. I will bring praise, I will bring praise. No weapon formed against me shall remain. I will rejoice, I will declare, God is my victory and He is here. This is my prayer in the battle, when triumph is still on its way. I am a conqueror and co-heir with Christ, so firm on His promise I'll stand. I will bring praise, I will bring praise. No weapon formed against me shall remain. I will rejoice, I will declare, God is my victory and He is here. All of my life, in every season, You are still God. I have a reason to sing. I have a reason to worship. All of my life, in every season, You are still God. I have a reason to sing. I have a reason to worship. All of my life, in every season, You are still God. I have a reason to sing. I have a reason to worship. And all of my life, in every season, You are still God. I have a reason to sing. I have a reason to worship. I will bring praise, I will bring praise. No weapon formed against me shall remain. I will rejoice, I will declare, God is my victory, and I will bring praise, I will bring praise. No weapon formed against me shall remain. I will rejoice, I will declare, God is my victory, and He is here. He is here. I will bring all the praise. Even when it's dark and scary, I know you are good.
This last year's been pretty intense, hasn't it? I mean, COVID, widespread natural disasters, anger and unrest, and then what can only be described as evil seeming to advance all over the place. No wonder I'm hearing a lot of Christians speculating that we just might be in the last days, as in the end times. And you know what? Maybe they're right. Or maybe they're not. And frankly, it doesn't really even matter. Because Jesus tells us that that's not the important thing to concentrate on. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24. Right? It's the week that's going to end with Jesus hanging on a cross. And early in the week, Jesus has been teaching in the temple area. And now he and his disciples are leaving the temple area, and the disciples are gawking at all the buildings, the temple and all the grounds, which were really pretty impressive, especially to some country guys from Galilee. And as they're gawking at those and looking at those, Jesus turns to them and says, "Hey, see all these grand buildings? All these impressive buildings, the temple and all its grounds that you think are going to be there forever, that are never going to be destroyed. Hey, it's all going to be destroyed." The disciples are like, they do a double take and, huh? Like, say what? Come again? Because like most people in their day, they thought that could never happen. And that if it did happen, it would certainly mean, well, this is the end of the world. So later in that day, as they're relaxing on the Mount of Olives, the disciples pull Jesus aside and ask him for a little inside information. I'm reading here from Matthew chapter 24, verse 3. Later, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives. His disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us, when will all this happen?" Remember, because they're thinking, if the temple's destroyed, it means the end of the world. Right? When will all this happen? What sign will signal your return and the end of the world? And then Jesus goes on to say, and we'll talk about this a little more if you happen to be in Chula Vista. We're going to be talking about this in our on-site worship. But he says, you know what, there's some signs. You're going to see natural disasters and fighting and wars and persecution and evils advancing and a whole lot of other stuff, which, they saw plenty of in the years ahead. And the world's been seeing plenty of ever since. Seems like the 2020 stuff, if you read history, has been around for quite a while. And Jesus also says that, in those kind of times, it's going to be hard, not easy, to keep following him. And, we've had some experience with that too, haven't we? But then Jesus also says, no one knows the day or the hour. You don't know exactly when. And so, because you don't know the exact when, Jesus is saying that's not the important thing to focus on. All right, it may be interesting, but it's really not all that important. So Jesus doesn't focus their attention on the when. He focuses their attention on the now. Right now, the most important part of the now, that's going to play out right in front of their eyes in a couple of days. Jesus has been telling them quite plainly, it's necessary for me to suffer and to die and to rise again. And that was going to happen. They were going to see it in a few days. And that would seem to them like it was the end of the world, at least the end of their world. But it wasn't, far from it. The death and resurrection of Jesus was actually where their life was found. And it's where our life is found. And it's really where readiness for the end of the world, whenever it happens, is found as well. See, it's the death of Jesus that pays for all our sins. It's the blood of Jesus that offers us forgiveness. It's the resurrection of Jesus from the dead that defeats the power of sin and death and the power of the devil and opens the way to everlasting life. All without us having to do anything for it other than open our hands and receive what Jesus has already done for us and believe that it's ours. Right? And that's the most important. The next most important thing, and here's where Jesus' answer to his disciples take us today, is, well, then how do you live out your faith in the times that you're living in? Whether it's the end times or not. How do you live out your faith with the people that you're living with right now? See, it seems that in the church, I think we have the tendency sometimes to shift our focus toward that interesting but maybe not so important questions. And I think, frankly, that end times is one of those. And that shift in focus gets us sort of off track and off mission. And Jesus doesn't want that for us. He not only wants us to have faith, he also wants us to live out our faith and to serve him and to serve his purposes. So what he does here is he uses the disciples' questions about the end, the interesting but not really important stuff. He uses that to turn his disciples' attentions back to what for him are the more important things. Now that you have faith, how should you live? Now that you have faith, what should you do? Now that you have faith, who should you be? Or answering those questions correctly, that's going to help you not only survive, but even to thrive in crazy and conflicted moments in history like these ones, whether it's the end times or not. Now, to get at those answers, Jesus is going to tell 3 stories. And he tells these stories because he knows that stories are going to stick with his friends a whole lot better than some fill-in-the-blank lecture. The stories are in Matthew chapter 25. So go ahead and grab a Bible if you have one and follow along, and let's dig in.
Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The 5 who were foolish didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps, but the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. When the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight they were roused by the shout, "Look, the bridegroom is coming! Come out and meet him!" All the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Then the 5 foolish ones asked the others, "Please give us some of your oil because our lamps are going out." But the others replied, "We don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourselves." But while they were gone to buy oil, the bridegroom came. Then those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was locked. Later, when the other 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside, calling, "Lord, Lord, open the door for us." But he called back, "Believe me, I don't know you. So you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or hour of my return."
The kingdom of heaven is like a man going on a trip. He called his servants and entrusted some money to them. He gave one man $10,000, another $4,000, and another $2,000. Each was given money based on his ability. Then the man went on his trip. The one who received $10,000 invested the money at once and doubled his money. The one who had $4,000 did the same and also doubled his money. But the one who received $2,000 went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The one who received $10,000 brought the additional $10,000. He said, "Sir, you gave me $10,000. I've doubled the amount." His master replied, "Good job. You're a good and faithful servant. You proved that you could be trusted with a small amount. I will put you in charge of a large amount. Come and share your master's happiness." The one who received $4,000 came and said, "Sir, you gave me $4,000. I've doubled the amount." His master replied, "Good job. You're a good and faithful servant. You proved that you could be trusted with a small amount. I will put you in charge of a large amount. Come and share your master's happiness." Then the one who received $2,000 came and said, "Sir, I knew that you are a hard person to please. You harvest where you haven't planted and gather where you haven't scattered any seeds. I was afraid, so I hid your $2,000 in the ground. Here's your money." His master responded, "You evil and lazy servant. If you knew that I harvest where I haven't planted and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have invested my money with the bankers. When I returned, I would have received my money back with interest. Take the $2,000 away from him. Give it to the one who has the $10,000. To all who have, more will be given, and they will have more than enough. But everything will be taken away from those who don't have much. Throw this useless servant outside into the darkness. People will cry and be in extreme pain there."
But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand, and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality? Or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" Then the king will say, "I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." Then the king will turn to those on his left and say, "Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me." Then they will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and not help you?" And he will answer, "I tell you the truth, when you refused to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me." And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life.
Okay, to help us understand what Jesus is driving at in these stories, there's a couple of things that it's important for us to remember. First, remember that all these stories are really told in answer to the same question. And the question's not, how do we get to heaven? The question's, well, when's the end going to be? See, what do we do to get to heaven? That question's not really about what we do at all. It's about receiving in faith what Jesus did for us at the cross, and that he gives to us freely. No strings attached. What that means is that these stories are not telling us prerequisites to get into heaven. All right? And they're not telling you things that you have to do to be considered for admission into heaven. See, believing Jesus has all the bases covered on that one. Second thing you got to understand is, while the disciples asked when, Jesus doesn't really answer that question specifically, other than to say, well, it's coming. Third big thing to remember is, here's what Jesus is actually telling you in these stories. What he's telling you to do is how to live. How to live out your faith when things are so uncertain and unsettled and unpredictable, kind of like they are now. Now, when I understand that that's the context of these stories, and you read all three stories together like that, it gives you a pretty good idea of what Jesus is trying to tell us and trying to say about living out our faith, whether it's end times or not. What he's saying is be prepared, be useful, and be helpful. All right, that's how you live out your faith. Be prepared, be useful, be helpful. Now let's take a closer look. The first of those stories is the story of the 10 bridesmaids, Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 1. And let me give you a little background there. The story follows some pretty normal wedding customs in first century Israel. Engagement was a legally binding marriage contract. The couple didn't live together, but the engagement could only be dissolved by divorce. They were apart for a number of months, and as they were apart, they were getting ready for the wedding, both the bride and the groom. And then, when things were ready, it wasn't like our day, all right? In our day, you say something like, well, okay, the wedding is going to be on such and such a day at such and such a time. Please RSVP so we can plan correctly. Back in that day, you kind of had a general idea, but date and time were a little more fluid. It was pretty normal to have a general idea, but not a specific day and not a specific time. And then all of a sudden, the announcement would come. Like, everything's ready. All right, it's the big celebration day. And what would happen is, after the announcement, is the bridegroom would come with his friends and the bride's friends in a big long procession to the bride's house, and then they'd have another big long procession from her house to his house, where the wedding celebration and the consummation would be complete. And that might seem like a kind of a weird way to run a wedding for us, but like I said, it was pretty standard operating procedure back then. Now, here's something else that happened pretty frequently, right? You want your wedding to be a big event, right? All right, a big event, a huge party, a grand celebration. Well, if the groom, as happened in this story, happened to come at night, all right, it's going to have that effect. Remember, this is a world without electricity, and so at night it gets dark. All right, really, really dark and really, really quiet. And so imagine that dark and that quiet and that stillness is suddenly interrupted with all sorts of twinkling lamps and torches and the sound of singing. It must have seemed sort of like New Year's Eve. Right? That would really add to the festivity of the occasion, make it the huge event. But also remember this. This first century world doesn't have 24-hour convenience stores or 24-hour super Walmarts. So if you wanted to be a part of the whole celebration, you wanted to make sure, and you knew that, a lot of times the procession happened at night, well, you had to have your stuff on hand. And you had to have your oil there to make sure that you'd be able to not just start the procession, but make it all the way through both of those long processions. Now back to Jesus' story. All right, all 10 of these bridesmaids were invited. And all 10 wanted to go, and all 10 make initial preparations to attend. And you know what? You read the story, and all 10 fell asleep, too, while they were waiting. So, why did only 5 make it into the wedding celebration? And 5 were left out in the cold? Well, here's the difference. While all of them slept, the ones that Jesus calls the wise ones apparently kept watch. Not only to make sure that their lamps were filled in the first place, that they had enough oil for their torches, but that they had enough oil to make it all the way through all the procession and all the way through the night. In other words, they were prepared. All right? And that's Jesus' point to us about how do we live out our faith in these times that we live in. He's saying, be prepared. Right? Matthew chapter, the end of the story, he says this, so you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or the hour of my return. Now, if you're listening to this and you're not yet a follower of Jesus, but you're kind of thinking about it, the first step to be prepared is to have that oil in your lamps, to have faith. And it's simply faith that Jesus loves you, faith that Jesus died for you, faith that Jesus rose for you, faith that Jesus wants to have a relationship with you. Because if you haven't taken care of that yet? I mean, just hit pause, ask him in your heart right now, and he's going to come. If you've already have faith, the question is, well then, how do you make sure that you have enough oil, enough faith to last through these dark of the night times? In other words, what makes you prepared? What makes us ready? Well, here's the first point. Preparation is a whole lot more about heart knowledge than it is about head knowledge. It's more about how well does God know you than how many things intellectually that you know about God. I mean, here's a good way to think about it. Is your relationship with God a professional one, or is it a personal one? If to be prepared is opt for personal. Here's the second thing. Preparation is about focused attention and consistent action. Focused attention and consistent action. All right, the oil wasn't going to replace itself, was it? The wise bridesmaids actually had to have made a conscious effort and to refill the oil jars. All right, get the point Jesus is making here? 5 of them thought, hey, I'm sort of ready. I have the invitation. I know I'm invited. That's good enough. And 5 didn't want to take any chance on missing out on the celebration, so they made sure they had plenty of oil that would be available in those dark of the night times. Now, which were wise and which were foolish? And if you're a believer, which do you want to be? All right, if you have a choice between passively waiting in the relationship or passionately pursuing the relationship, choose passionately pursuing. That's what helps you be prepared. And notice how this preparation that I'm talking about ties into what we heard Jesus say just a couple of chapters before. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. So now, before we move on, let's pause for a minute and take some inventory. How's that living out your faith going for you? I mean, what are you doing to pursue closeness with God? How much time and effort are you investing, and how often? What friends do you have who are going to help you pursue that path, even when you get kind of tired of waiting? And what one thing will you do this week to pursue the relationship more passionately? That's all part of being prepared. So go ahead, hit pause, take that inventory, talk about it, and then when you're ready, hit play, and we'll get into the next story. Story number 2, if you're following along, starts at verse 14. It's called the story or the parable of the talents. Now in the story, you've got a man who's got a lot of money, and he gives his servants money to manage in his absence. And his expectation is they're going to do that they're going to manage the money, that they're going to manage the money well, that they're going to make even more money for him. So what point is Jesus making in that story about living out our faith? Well, again, there's a few things in the details of the story that'll help us arrive at that. Here's detail number 1. I'm reading at verse 15. He gave one man $10,000, another $4,000, and another $2,000. Each was given money based on his ability. Now that's the phrase I want to zero in on, based on his ability. See, each servant was different. Each servant had different abilities, different capabilities, and because of that, the man gives them different amounts of money. Why? Because he wants them to succeed. He wants them to do well. He doesn't want them to feel the weight or the burden of something that they just can't handle, that's beyond them. He knows them. He knows their capabilities. He knows what they can do, and he entrusts them with the exact amount of money that they can handle while getting the job done. And what I notice here is the servants are actually, they're good with that. They're okay with that. There's no comparing, there's no complaining. It seems like they know their job isn't to compete with each other, but to produce for their boss. Now here's a second detail. I'm reading at verse 16. The one who received $10,000 invested the money at once and doubled his money. The one who had $4,000 did the same and also doubled his money. Now the key phrase there isn't doubling your money. The key phrase to me is at once. See, he put it to work at once, which means immediately, without delay. He knows what his job is, and he gets to it immediately. Now, why is that? Why does the servant know his job so well without getting any particular instructions? Well, it's because he has a personal relationship with the boss, not just a professional one. Kind of relates to what we talked about in the Be Prepared story. The response flows out of the relationship. It's another example of love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. See, he knows his boss. He knows his boss's intent. He knows his boss's heart, and he feels his boss's trust and wants to do what his boss wants done, and so he works at producing the results the boss wants to see. And it all flows from that relationship. Here we're starting to zero in on what Jesus is telling us. Here's the third thing, detail number 3, down at verse 18. But the one who received $2,000 went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. That's the phrase I want to zero on there, hid his master's money. Was the servant reckless? Was he careless? Did he squander the money? Did he steal it? No, he just buried it. But in doing so, he showed that he didn't really know the boss's heart. And he acted as if he really had no gift at all, because the very nature of the master's gifts is that they're to be used. I mean, that's why the first two servants, they had that relationship with the master, and they knew that he wanted them to be used. And that's what the last detail shows us. Now I'm reading down at verse 26. His master responded, "You evil and lazy servant. If you knew that I harvest where I haven't planted and gather what I haven't scattered, then you should have invested my money with the bankers. When I returned, I would have received my money back with interest. Take the $2,000 away from him, give it to the one who has 10,000. To all who have, more will be given. They will have more than enough, but everything will be taken away from those who don't have much. Throw this useless servant outside into the darkness." Here's the phrase I want to zero in on. You should have. Right? It literally says it was necessary that you do something with what you were given. Absolutely necessary. And you would have known that if you'd known the master's heart, if you had that relationship and responded to his love. The indictment? Well, because you didn't do what was necessary, he calls the servant evil and lazy. Evil and lazy. And then jump to verse 30, and you see that Jesus equates those words evil and lazy with useless. Useless. The evil and lazy servant is called the useless servant. And again, he didn't squander it, he didn't abuse it, he just did nothing and expected to escape blame. Well, did he? Can we? Can we escape blame if we do nothing with our gifts? Can we escape blame if we do nothing with our faith? Can we escape blame if we underutilize our gifts for God? Can we escape blame if we make the gifts primarily about me rather than about serving God? Jesus' point here, don't miss this, it's be useful. And especially, more specifically, Jesus is saying, be useful to me, not just to yourself. And that applies, get this, no matter what age you are, No matter how long you've been following Jesus, how short you've been following Jesus, no matter how much talent or ability that you have. So before we move on, let's take another inventory about that. See how we are at living out our faith in this usefulness department. How are you using your time for Jesus? How are you using your talents and abilities for Jesus? How are you using your money for Jesus? How are you using your influence for Jesus? How are you using those things in each of those areas? Are you following Jesus' heart, or are you simply doing what you want to do? And what's one change you can make in a place where you're just kind of getting by? All right, answering those questions honestly is a good step toward living out our faith and being useful. So again, take the time, hit pause, go through that inventory, talk about it if you can, and when you're ready, hit play and we'll get into that third story. Okay, story number 3, this one called The Story of the Sheep and the Goats. It starts down at verse 31 if you're following along. And this is a judgment day story. It's the end of time story that the disciples were asking about. Now, a common question of these end times for people is, well, who's going where? And this story, well, it addresses that, but again, unless we're careful, we're really going to get off the rails here and go into a wrong direction. Now, to keep us on the rails, remember this. The main point of all 3 stories has to do with how we live now as we're waiting for the end to arrive. All right, Jesus has told us, be prepared. He's told us, be useful, especially to him. And now in this story, he's adding a final big rock to our here's how you live out your faith pile. And the big rock is be helpful. And be helpful especially to those that Jesus calls the least of these. Now understand this. You're not helpful because you're trying to earn some special reward from God or work your way into heaven. None of us can do that. Not one. All right, salvation is always, always, always a gift. The story itself points that out, I think, because the ones that Jesus in the story calls the righteous, they weren't even aware that they were doing good things for God, which I think they would have been if they were trying to run up the good works score. Right? When Jesus says, hey, thanks, you did all this stuff for me, they say, Lord, when did we do this for you? Seems to me like the righteous weren't being helpful because they were trying to earn something for God. They were being helpful because their heart had been changed by God. And they were responding to his love that was at work in their heart. Right? It kind of connects again with that earlier teaching that Jesus we've been referring to. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And as you're passionately pursuing that relationship, and as God's love is at work in you, then Jesus says, and this is on the same level, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. As yourself. So, think about this. If you were hurting, would you want someone to help? If you were struggling, would you want someone to help? Well then, if you see someone hurting or struggling, help them. Help them. That's what Jesus is saying. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, why live that way? Again, it's not to earn anything from God. We got to get that in our heads that the old song is right. All right, Jesus paid it all. Jesus did it all. There's nothing more that I can do. There's nothing that I can add, which means that helping others, even the least of these, isn't going to make God love me any more than he already does. So, well then, why do it? Why do it? Especially if it's costly, if it's time-consuming, if it's inconvenient. Well, you do it because you love God, and you're living out your faith. See, the love of God at work in you has changed the way that you relate to Him now and the way that you relate to others. You love God personally and passionately, not just professionally, and then God's passions become your passions. Let that sink in a minute. As you're loving God more passionately than just professionally, His passions become your passions. And you start to view people and things the way that He does. A consistent theme of the Bible is that God is on the side of the hurting and the helpless and those who can't speak for themselves. And also tells us consistently that God uses believers as His hands and His feet in this world, both to do good and to show others a little more of what God is like. And see, when we live and love like Jesus did, we help other people see Jesus. We really do. And that's why Jesus says here, be helpful. All right? Be helpful because other people need your help. And be helpful because people need to see me. So, if you see a need and God has given you the means to help, what do? Help. All right? Be helpful. Help, period. Don't worry about judging the merit. Just help where you can, in the best way that you can, especially among the least of these. Not to earn God's love, but to show God's love. Here's one specific way you can do that. Here at Concordia, we've been having a rice and bean collection distributed by our partner Mil Generaciones in Tijuana. You know, things are tough in a lot of places, and they're really tough in Tijuana right now. There's a lot of need, and deprivation leads to desperation. And we hear from our partners there that there's 3-4 times of gunshots every day. What can we do to help? Well, what they're doing, and the church that we're supporting there is doing, is distributing staple food, rice and beans, to people that really need it. If you've already given to that, hey, thanks. We've helped more than 50 families to be able to be fed, but we can do more. And I know if you have the means to do so, I want to invite you to give again. I know that I'm going to be making another trip to the store. Why? Well, my stomach's kind of rumbling as I'm taping this right now, and that's reminding me that I got to eat like every day, right? You too? Well, they have to eat there every day too, and the need is so much greater. So if you can help or continue to help or do more, please do so. If you're in Chula Vista here, drop some of those rice or pinto beans by. Our preschool lobby's open every day from 7 to 5:30. We're here for on-site worship Sunday at 10 o'clock. And if you're not here in Chula Vista, if you're watching somewhere else, you know what you can do? If that cause touches your heart, you can donate specifically to that. And you can know that 100% of what you give is going to be used to purchase rice and beans, to feed some of the least of those who are in need. Here's how you do that. First, you go to our website, concordiachurch.com. And up there, you're going to find a Give tab. And you want to click on that Give tab. And then it's going to show a little message that says, leaving this website for Subsplash. That's our secure online giving platform that we're using. So you want to click continue for that. All right. Then the first thing that Subsplash is going to do is going to say put in an amount. Now you're not designating yet where it is. You can do that in a minute. But you got to put some amount in to continue. So whatever is on your heart to give to that rice and beans, just put in the amount. Then click continue. All right. This is going to take you to the next spot. Then Subsplash. Here's a kind of little bit of a pain. It's going to ask you to register. Subsplash is working on putting a guest thing, so you don't have to register, but it's not there yet. So you're going to have to put an email in and a password and register, and then click next to go to the next spot, and that's going to pull you to the fund menu. On the fund menu, it's just a little drop-down menu again, and the first thing after general is Rice and Beans Fund Tijuana. That's the one you want to click on if you want this stuff to go to Rice and Beans. Choose that, and then you go ahead and process the payment. And again, 100% of that's going to go to feed those families. By doing that, you're helping the least of these at a time that they really need it. Not only doing good, but just maybe helping nudge them a little closer to God as they see a little more of what God's really like. And by doing these things, that's a way not only to survive, but actually to thrive in these crazy and confusing and uncertain and settled moments like these. To do what Jesus said about living out our faith. To work at being prepared, at being useful, and at being helpful. And as you're being helpful, doing it being Christ-like. And understand this. It's our time to do that now. It's our time.
It's our time. We must rise up and no longer disparage. It's our time, church, to honor our heritage. We have a Savior. He gave it all on the cross. We stand beside martyrs who counted nothing as loss. They took God's mysteries, opened them up for us. Stephen, John the Baptist, Bonhoeffer, Jan Hus. Surrounded by a cloud of witnesses above, it's now our turn to model His unending love. Our mission is one we cannot confuse, nor muddy up with some trite excuse. You say you're not well-versed, ready, or able. I think Moses even tried to use that fable. The time we have, it's now more urgent. If we should hear, well done, faithful servant. Yeah, church, it's our time. It's our time to confess the ways we're mangled, the sins and selfishness that have us entangled. Lust, greed, and pride, their path leads to the grave. Yet we return to our sins as if we're a slave. Can we survive in this putrid Dead Sea? I quote Paul, may it never be. So let's cast aside our individual leprosy and begin to leave a biblical legacy. There's a glorious prize awaiting to be won, and the way to win is to start to run. Let's lace them up and fight the good fight, become to the world both salt and light. Our life on earth is merely a vapor. Our chapter must move from pen to paper. So church, let's get to writing because it's our time. It's our time, church. We have what it takes to help the world from its slumber awake. To Jesus, we are His beautiful bride. Whom shall we fear with Him on our side? We have each other. We are not alone. It's iron to iron in the combat zone. There's a promise of life full of adventure. As long as we give both talents and treasure, the workers are few, the harvest is plenty, with so many lives running on empty. Scores of people trying to cope, they've come to the end of their proverbial rope. Young eyes are wandering, looking for direction. Make sure we point them to His resurrection. The clock's ticking, we're on our dime. Hey church, rise up! It's our time.
I can see the waters raging at my feet. I can feel the breath of those surrounding me. I can hear the sound of nations rising up. We will not be overtaken. We will not be overcome. I can walk down this dark and painful road. I can face Every fear of the unknown I can hear. All God's children singing out, we will not be overtaken, we will not be overcome. The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, the same power that commands the dead to wake, lives in us, lives in us. The same power that moves mountains when He speaks, the same power that can calm a raging sea, lives in us, lives in us. He lives in us, lives in us. We have hope that His promises are true. In His strength there is nothing we can't do. Yes, we know there are greater things in store. We will not be overtaken, we will not be overcome. The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, the same power that commands the dead to wake, lives in us, lives in us. The same power that moves mountains when He speaks, the same power that can calm the raging sea, lives in us, lives in us. He lives in us, lives in us. Greater is He that is living in me. He's conquered our enemy. No power of darkness, no weapon prevails. We stand here in victory. Greater is He that is living in me. He's conquered our enemy. No power of darkness, no weapon prevails. We stand here in victory. The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, the same power that commands the dead to wake, lives in us, lives in us. The same power that moves mountains when He speaks, the same power that can calm a raging sea, lives in us, lives in us. He lives in us, lives in us.